In this video, we are going to see macro design overview. I, Professor D.V. Kosti, welcome you for this lecture. The design overview is shown here in terms of different tasks that are involved in macro expansion. Now, we have seen how the macro is expanded in the previous lectures. And this is just an overview to understand how macro expansion is done with different tasks as follows. First task is whenever we want to expand a particular macro, we need to recognize a macro call. Once we recognize a macro call, then the next task is deciding what values formal parameters should have in the expansion of macro call. That means a macro call with a list of actual parameters is required to map the parameters which are there in the macro definition. Once decision is made regarding the values to the formal parameters, next task is maintaining values of expansion time variables. That is during the expansion of the macro call. So expansion time variables value maintenance is important. After doing this, maintaining the values of expansion time variables, we have fourth task as organizing expansion time control flow. So by default, expansion time control flow is sequential, but if at all preprocessor is there, or we have seen in advanced macro facilities, AIF, that means if there is a change in the control flow using AIF or AGO statements, then this expansion time control flow is to be organized. Once this is done, the next task is finding the statement that defines a specific sequencing symbol. So this specific sequencing symbol is to be defined by the is defined by a particular statement, and we need to find that statement. And at last, sixth step is performing expansion of model statements. Now we know what is meant by model statement. So all the fruitful statements of a macro definition are called as model statements. So in a macro definition, you know macro definition starts with a macro, macro, ends with MEND, macro end. After macro, starting of a macro, macro, the next line is always a macro name along with its formal parameter list. So after these two statements, then the actual model statements will come into picture. Before MEND, all the statements are model statement. So after macro macro with formal calls, that means from third instruction till second last instruction, all the statements are model statements, and these statements are required to be expanded. So these are the tasks involved in macro expansion. Next is four-step procedure to arrive at design specification of each task. So whatever tasks we have seen on the previous slide, so for each of these tasks, we have four-step procedure. First one is identify the information needed for performing a particular task. So this information identification is important. The second is design a suitable data structure for recording the information. So whatever information is identified, that information must be recorded somewhere. That is important. Once that recorded information is kept into a suitable data structure, then the next step, that is determine the processing needed for obtaining and maintaining the information. So if the data structure is decided, that means in a particular data structure this information is to be stored, then the next task is how to store that data, that is processing needed for obtaining and maintaining the information. Once this is done, the next step, that is last step, is determine the processing needed for performing the task by using the recorded information. Now, whatever information is stored into the data structure, Now, for on that data, a processing is needed. Then this processing is performed using the recorded information. Coming to the uh, end of the lecture, in this way, we have understood the macro design overview. So, in this way, we have understood macro design overview. Thank you very much. Happy learning. Do subscribe the channel to get the next videos. Thank you very much. We'll meet in the next lecture.